Hello, this is part 1 of my analysis of every Pokemon in competitive Gen 2. Today, I will be having a look at every fully evolved Gen 1 Pokemon. I'll do every fully evolved Gen 2 Pokemon in part 2. I will be discussing what tiers they get used in, what they do in those tiers, and highlighting any interesting notes, trivia or history. I will be covering the Smogon formats because they are the most developed, played, and ones I am most knowledgeable about. When I am discussing a Pokemon, I'll put its important information on screen. I'll also show replays featuring the Pokemon. If you get confused by any of the jargon I say, like stab or VR, then check the description. I'll explain what they mean down there. I'll also explain UUBL in the description because it can be kinda confusing. This video is long enough as is, so I'm just gonna get started now. Venusaur is a very niche choice in GSC UU. Thanks to its typing, bulk, and access to instant recovery and synthesis, Venusaur is an appealing option for some defensive teams. It's one of the best answers to Pokemon like Machamp and Vaporeon. It can improve its matchup against Pokemon like Vaporeon and support its team with Light Screen. Venusaur was overshadowed by Meganium for much of GSC's history, but it's found its own role now. While Meganium is better against Pokemon like Marowak, Venusaur is better against Machamp. Venusaur also has an immunity to Toxic. Venusaur does get setup moves like Growth and Sword Stance, but it's not very effective at using them. Venusaur is ultimately rare because it's passive and very hard to fit onto teams. Another aspect of Venusaur's identity is the long-standing interest in dropping it to UU. Of all the UUBL Pokemon, Venusaur is probably the one that would be worst in UU. If it dropped, it would likely be quite bad. Its set of tools just isn't good for the UU metagame. Charizard is a moderate threat in GSC UU. At base 100 speed, Charizard is the fastest user of Belly Drum in GSC UU. With Earthquake and Rock Slide, it scores one-hit KOs on Pokemon weak to these moves after setup. It also has an immediately powerful Fire Blast for Pokemon like Skarmory, Steelix, and Exeggutor. Charizard can be a fearsome Pokemon, but it's ultimately high risk, high reward. It requires a lot of support. It really wants Pokemon like Starmie, Raikou, and Gengar to be paralysed or KO'd, or they just outspeed and KO you after a Belly Drum. Because it lacks stab on Earthquake and Rock Slide, it often comes up short even after using Belly Drum. Pokemon like Snorlax, Suicune, and Vaporeon are able to survive a hit and retaliate. Charizard's bulk and typing make it hard for it to find setup opportunities, though it does have a useful Spikes immunity. Blastoise is an elite Pokemon in GSC UU. Blastoise is by far the most popular user of Rapid Spin in this tier. With spikes being as common as they are, having a Pokemon that can get rid of them is valuable. Against Quillfish, the spiker in UU, Blastoise can wear it down with Surf, while taking unboosted Sludge Bomb as well. While Haunter can block Blastoise's attempts to Rapid Spin, it takes a hefty amount from Surf, making switching it in risky. Blastoise is an effective Pokemon in its own right. It's one of the best answers to both Nidoqueen and Piloswine, and does well against other Pokemon like Aerodactyl. Blastoise is a staple on slower paced teams, being all but required on stall teams. It mostly sticks to a Rest Talk set, though it can drop rests and run moves like Earthquake and Zap Cannon. Its main flaw tends to be its passivity. A sleeping Blastoise can be abused by Pokemon like Scyther, Pinsir, or Girafarig. It's much less powerful offensively than other water types, like Slowbro or Gyarados. Butterfree is one of the worst Pokemon in the game. Its poor stats, bad typing, and barren move pool means it stands little to no chance in any tier with decently powerful Pokemon. Sleep Powder isn't worth much when Rest Talk is so common in all the lower tiers. It certainly doesn't make up for how bad Butterfree is. Butterfree is down in ZU, and it wasn't very effective there. Other leads, like Magby or Meowth, are generally better options. With ZU now being power crept due to drops from PU, Butterfree probably has an even worse time in this new metagame. Beedrill is also one of the weaker Pokemon in GSC, though it is a bit better off than Butterfree is. With Sword Stance and Agility, Beedrill can pretend to be a sweeper. It only becomes somewhat useful in PU. UU and NU have significantly better Sword Stance users. In PU, Beedrill is not very good still. It's frail, matches up very poorly against the dominant Venomoth, and faces competition with other sweepers like Seaking. Beedrill recently dropped to ZU, and at the very least, it seems to be doing well there. Beedrill might even be overpowered in the new GSC ZU. Pidgeot is a decent Pokemon in GSC NU. Pidgeot is forced into playing a more defensive role. It's outclassed as a pure offensive normal type by Fearow and Persian. Pidgeot can be an annoying tanky Pokemon thanks to its bulk and spikes immunity. With Reflect, Pidgeot can temporarily boost the physical defense of itself and its teammates. Pidgeot's most notable use in NU is answering the dominant and very common Statler. Pidgeot is a very good answer to Rest Hawk Statler, and this gives it a spot in many slower paced teams, who can struggle with Statler long term. Pidgeot also answers Pokemon like Dugtrio. Pidgeot isn't passive either, it stab double-edged 3-hit KOs prominent Pokemon such as Statler, Octillery and Xatu. Raticate is a below average Pokemon in GSC NU. Raticate on its own is a fine Pokemon, having high speed, stab double edge and Super Fang. With Super Fang, it can slice a foe's HP in half and then follow it up with a strong double edge. The issue is that it faces a lot of competition with other normal types, most notably from Persian and Fearow. They are better if you want a fast and strong normal type. This means you have to stack Raticate alongside these normals for it to not just be outclassed, and doing so makes your team worse against certain threats. Raticate teams tend to be flawed defensively. Raticate itself is frail, and while Super Fang is a good move, it can be annoying to pull it when using Sleep Talk. Raticate is one of the worst Pokemon in NU that is actually tiered as NU. Fearow is a very good Pokemon in GSC NU. Thanks to its high attack and speed, Fearow is an immediately powerful threat. Its stab double edge hits very hard and 3-hit KOs much of the tier. It also has stab Drill Peck for Primeape, Hitmonlee, Gloom and Pineco. Drill Peck complements double edge well on Fearow's only viable set, Rest Talk. Sleep Talk can pull 2 strong stab moves when Fearow is asleep. At base 100 speed, Fearow is one of the fastest Pokemon in GSC NU. Its ability to outspeed Primeape and Xatu is very notable. Fearow can mess NU teams up if it's not prepared for. There are stops to it though. It gets countered by rock types like Graveler, Sudowoodo and Shuckle. Wheezing can also be quite annoying for it. Arbok is a garbage Pokemon in GSC NU. It does not belong in NU, and if the tiers had active tiering, Arbok would be in PU. Arbok is frail and faces so much competition from other poison types and physical attackers. Why use Curse Arbok when you could use Curse Statler and Meditate Primeape? Why use Arbok when you could use Wheezing? Arbok makes it harder to use Wheezing, who is kinda the best Pokemon in GSC NU, and far more useful than Arbok is. Arbok is both outclassed and not very good as a standalone Pokemon. Raichu is one of the most interesting Pokemon in competitive GSC. It is pretty embarrassingly in a lower tier than its pre-evolution, and like Pikachu it has shifted around the lower tiers. Raichu dropped to NU in the 2018 revamp of GSC NU because it wasn't considered good enough to be UU. Once Raichu dropped to NU, it immediately took over the tier. Raichu was the best Pokemon in GSC NU. It was essentially too good not to use. Its best answer was also itself, and it made the tier very unfun to watch as Rest Hawk Raichu wars became a very common sight. After dominating the tier for over a year, Raichu was banned from GSC NU. Nowadays, it has a very small niche in UU on double electric teams alongside Electabuzz, but these teams have many flaws and are hard to use. Sandslash technically has a tiny niche in OU as a bargain bin Marowak. Sandslash's higher speed lets it outpace Pokemon that would outpace Marowak like Exeggutor, and Sandslash gets the whole leftovers. Marowak is the OU ground for a reason though. Sandslash is substantially less powerful. As such, Sandslash ends up in UU, where it is okay. Sandslash's typing gives us some advantages over other Sword Stance users like Scyther and Pinsir. It's a Pokemon with a lot of potential, but it's hard to use and fit on teams. It's a high maintenance Pokemon that requires a team around it to support it, and if not used well, it will disappoint you hard. Despite a fantastic move pool and interesting defensive typing, Nidoqueen goes largely unused in OU because of Nidoking, whose higher attacking stats and speed make him more suited for the OU metagame. Nidoqueen is, however, one of the most important UU Pokemon. For a long time, Nidoqueen was the defining Pokemon of GSC UU. It was near universally considered to be the best Pokemon in the tier and something that the majority of teams should use. Nowadays, Nidoqueen isn't the best Pokemon in UU, and other teams prefer to use other ground types over it. It's still a top tier Pokemon though. It's a threatening mixed attacker with no hard counters. All of its checks are capable of being broken with good play. Most offensive teams use Nidoqueen as their ground type, given that it handles electric types much better than Piloswine and is much stronger offensively than Quagsire. Nidoking is the first Pokemon in this video to be tiered as OU. Nidoking has been an important part of GSC OU for years due to its strength as a mixed attacker. Nidoking's serviceable attacking stats and wide coverage move pool make it the premier mixed attacker in OU. It's one of the best Pokemon for breaking down defensive teams, and it's able to further disrupt these teams with moves like Lovely Kiss and Thief. Nidoking's strange defensive typing also grants it an immunity to electric type attacks and toxic. While Nidoking has declined a bit recently due to metagame developments, such as the rise of Rest plus Sleep Talk Snorlax, few Pokemon are as scary as a well-played Nidoking. Clefable is not very good in GSC OU. Clefable's shtick in GSC OU is that of a belly drum sweeper. Clefable is unique as a belly drummer because it has access to moves like Moonlight and Encore. Clefable has so much going against it though. It has a very bad case of 4 move slot syndrome. It wants several different coverage moves to deal with the various Pokemon that can handle its normal type attacks, but it usually only gets to fit one. Its spot as a belly drum user is also fiercely contested by Charizard and Quagsire, who offer higher speed and a better defensive typing respectively. Clefable in OU is a very hard Pokemon to use effectively. Ninetales is a solid Pokemon down in NU. Ninetales is one of the better defensive Pokemon in NU. Thanks to its typing and bulk, it's one of the best answers to the tier's best Pokemon, Weezing, as well as threats like Xatu and Magnemite. Ninetales isn't entirely passive either. Its Stab Flamethrower 3KOs Pokemon like Statler, Weezing and Xatu. This is helped by its base 100 speed, making Ninetales one of the fastest Pokemon in NU. Ninetales is a staple on defensive and balanced teams in NU. Ninetales is stopped from being a top tier Pokemon by Octillery, who is a very common counter to it. It also struggles against Pokemon like Flareon, Rapidash and the tier's various rock types. Wigglytuff is the most controversial of NU's many normal types. Wigglytuff is a cursed sweeper in NU, taking advantage of it having only one weakness and solid bulk to be a solid setup sweeper. Once Wigglytuff gets going, it can become very difficult to stop. Not many Pokemon can immediately threaten it, and few can sustain its boosted hits. Wigglytuff works as a check to Pokemon like Xatu and Dugong, and it can use these Pokemon as an opportunity to set up. It is also favoured in Curse Wars against Pokemon like Porygon. Wigglytuff doesn't necessarily have to run Curse too. Some Growth Pass teams use Thunder over Curse. There have been serious discussions about banning Wigglytuff from GSC NU, and it's a divisive Pokemon. Some people think Wigglytuff is too strong, while others think it's manageable. Vileplume may be tiered as UU in GSC, but it most certainly doesn't belong there. Vileplume is completely unviable in GSC UU, and it should never be used on serious teams. Vileplume is completely outclassed as a defensive grass type by Blossom and an offensive grass type by Victory Bell. Grass Poison is a horrible typing for the GSC UU metagame. Victory Bell is already very bad in UU, and Vileplume is somehow worse. As a result of Vileplume's UU shittiness, there has been much discussion on dropping it to NU. Heck, there was even an NU plus Vileplume tour held. However, Vileplume was deemed by most players of that tour to be too good, or at least a negative addition to NU. Parasect is another one of the weakest Pokemon in the game, with mediocre stats including a dirt slow base 30 speed, as well as a horrible defensive typing giving it many weaknesses, including 2 quite effective ones. It's not hard to see why. Spore's a great move and all, but Parasect is next to worthless outside of it. Its non-Spore move pool is also barren. It's one of those Pokemon that has to rely on hidden power for its best stab move. Parasect is bad even down in ZU, the poor fella. Venomoth's mediocre stats and typing relegate it to the lower tiers. In NU, Venomoth is pretty bad. Its shtick in NU is that of a baton pass plus curse user, which can be passed to Pokemon like Statler. This whole strategy is very unreliable though, and as such Venomoth is PU. Venomoth is considered to be one of the top 2 Pokemon in PU, with some players ranking it as the best Pokemon in the tier. Venomoth is simply an obnoxious Pokemon. It hits decently hard with Sludge Bomb and Psychic, and further threatens status with Sleep Powder and Stun Spore. It's also much better at using Curse Pass in PU. Pokemon like Hitmontop become very powerful when passed a Curse. Venomoth also provides a 4 times fighting resistance in a tier where Hitmontop is the other contender for number 1. Dugtrio has been a relevant threat in all 4 eras of GSC NU, starting off as a top tier threat in the era where Mr. Mime was legal and continuing to be used today. Dugtrio's viability mostly stems from its speed and typing. At base 120 speed, Dugtrio is the fastest Pokemon in the metagame, and its Stab Earthquake hits the tiers Fire, Rock and Poison types super effectively. Dugtrio usually uses a substitute plus Screech set. Before Swagger was banned, Dugtrio was its best and most common abuser. For a long time, Dugtrio was considered to be one of the best Pokemon in GSC NU, with there even being called Savannah at one point. Its viability and usage have declined quite a bit in the last year though. Teams are built in a manner more hostile to Dugtrio, and people just value them on less. Pupitar has replaced Dugtrio and many teams as a Screech using ground type due to its additional normal resistance. Persian is a great Pokemon in NU. Persian is tied as the 2nd fastest Pokemon in NU, and its move pool makes it an annoying threat to handle. Hypnosis lets it put something to sleep, Thief lets it steal leftovers, and Screech lets it lower something's defense. It can also use Thunder to have a harder hit on flying types. Persian's also got that nice stab double edge and a decent attack stat. Persian's speed and hypnosis makes it the top offensive lead in GSC NU, leading the charge of offensive teams with its disrupting tactics. Persian can also use a Rest plus Sleep Talk set. When compared to Rest Talk Statler, this set is much better against Xatu and Fearow due to actually outspeeding them and having Thunder. Golduck is a weird one. It used to be in UU, but it was dropped to NU in the 2018 NU revamp because it was useless in UU, and it still is. Golduck was pretty good in NU as an offensive water type, bringing many nice traits to the table. It was held back a bit by Raichu however, who was both a good check and on every team. Eventually people got sick of Raichu and wanted to ban it, and this led to discussion on Golduck. With Raichu gone, Golduck lost its best check. Would Golduck now be too powerful? Well, we never found out. NU players agreed to ban Golduck alongside Raichu and Poliwrath. We did never see an NU metagame without Raichu but with Golduck, so there have been some conversations on how it would actually be. They haven't gotten anywhere though. It's agreed that Golduck isn't necessary to test. Golduck is now one of those Pokemon in limbo. It's completely unviable in UU, but it's banned from NU. Yet another prominent NU Pokemon. Primeape is one of the tier's most threatening Pokemon. Normal types are everywhere in NU, and Primeape has a powerful Cross Chop to dispatch them. This Cross Chop also hits rock types and threats like Dugong super effectively. Primeape is one of the fastest Pokemon in NU, outspeeding notable Pokemon like Statler and speed tying with Xatu. Thunder is surprisingly a staple move on Primeape. Thunder 2-KOs the annoying Xatu and Fearow and can spread paralysis on Pokemon like Weezing. Primeape is one of the reasons why Weezing is so common. Weezing is one of the only checks to it. Primeape used to run Substitute plus Meditate sets, and these are still viable, but Rest Talk with Thunder and Cross Chop is just so splashable. Primeape is rather infamous for its RNG. Its two main moves, Cross Chop and Thunder, are famously inaccurate, and this has led some people to criticize Primeape for its inconsistent nature. Primeape did decline in usage for a while, in part because of its RNG, but it's returned to being one of the defining NU threats largely due to its Rest Talk set. Arcanine is pretty bad in UU. Arcanine has a rough time largely due to the amount of water types. Pokemon like Blastoise, Quagsire and Lantern just completely dominate it. It's also inconsistent at breaking Pokemon like Nidoqueen, Ampharos and Hypno. Arcanine is bad at breaking down its checks, and its checks happen to be pretty common Pokemon. Arcanine isn't completely useless though. Some teams, like Hyper Offense teams, can struggle to take it on. Its typing makes it one of the best pincer checks in the tier, and its decent bulk lets it wrestle with Pokemon like Mr. Mime and Haunter. Arcanine is basically a matchup fish. There are some teams it can work well against, but a lot of teams carry a Pokemon like Blastoise that counters it. With Arcanine being so bad in UU, there has been some discussion on dropping it to NU. It's agreed by basically everyone though that it would be too strong for NU. Poliwrath's story is similar to Golduck's. Poliwrath was once tiered as UU, but dropped to NU in 2018 because it sucks in UU. GSC UU is basically inhospitable for a water fighting type with average stats. Once it dropped to NU, Poliwrath was initially pretty good. It really came into its own after Feraligatr was banned. Poliwrath took Gator's spot as the premier bulky water type and established itself as one of the top Pokemon. Some even considered it to be number 2, just below Raichu. It was tough to break and formed an incredible defensive combo with Raichu. The two of them handled each other's checks nicely. Poliwrath, like Raichu, had the issue of walling itself, leading to a very boring and bad metagame. Eventually, Poliwrath was deemed to be too good and it was banned from NU alongside Raichu and Golduck. Poliwrath is now stuck in limbo. It's useless in UU and it's disallowed from NU. Alakazam is a threatening Pokemon in GSC OU. Alakazam is notable for the rise in usage and viability it's experienced in the last few years. In fact, while I was writing this video, Alakazam went and rose from UUBL to OU. Alakazam's wicked high special attack stat and Stab Psychic make it excellent at dispatching other prominent offensive Pokemon, like Nidoking, Gengar and Machamp. It's also one of the fastest Pokemon in the tier, outspeeding even Raikou and Starmie. Alakazam has Encore to shut down setup and punish usage of rest, as well as recover to heal itself. Alakazam's primary challenge is the various dark and specially defensive Pokemon in the tier. It's unreliable at breaking through Pokemon like Snorlax, Tyranitar, Blissey and Umbreon. Status, in particular paralysis, is another major issue for Alakazam. If Zam gets paralyzed by a stray Thunder or Thunder Wave, it becomes pretty easy to handle it. Machamp is a big threat in GSC OU. Not hard to see why, given that gargantuan 130 base attack stat. Fighting is a great offensive typing to have in GSC with so many teams stacking multiple fighting weak Pokemon. Machamp is one of the few Pokemon that can immediately threaten huge damage on Snorlax, though it isn't a safe switch into Snorlax's attacks. Cross Chop, its choice of fighting stab, has a boosted critical hit ratio for more damage. With Curse, Machamp is able to boost its attack and defense. Rock Slide 2-KO Zapdos after a Curse, Earthquake hits poison types like Nidoking and Gengar, Hidden Power Bug hits Exeggutor and other psychic types, and Hidden Power Ghost hits ghost types while retaining a hard hit on psychics. Machamp can be a bit frustrating to use, given its reliance on the 80% accurate cross chop, a move with just APP. It's also slow and doesn't provide much defensive utility outside of countering Tyranitar. Certain Pokemon become solid answers to it if it lacks the right coverage move. Exeggutor, for example, beats Machamp if it lacks Hidden Power Bug or Ghost. Victreebel is a terrible Pokemon in GSC UU. As I mentioned in Vileplume segment, Grass Poison is a bad typing for the UU metagame. Victreebel's stats are also poor for the most part. It's frail and its speed sucks for an offensive Pokemon. It does learn Sword Stance, but when nearly all top Pokemon 2-hit KO you, with several of them outspeeding, how are you gonna sweep? Victreebel is a Sword Stance user with resistances to water and electric, but it's still incredibly flawed. Not to mention teams with electric types like Ampharos, Magneton and Lantern, or waters like Blastoise, frequently pair them with Pokemon like Gligar and Aerodactyl who beat you anyway. Victreebel just doesn't work in UU. Tentacruel is one of the BL Pokemon with a solid niche in OU. In the old days, Tentacruel was mainly used as a sweeper with Sword Stance and Substitute, but this set has mostly died out. There's just too much in the way for it to work consistently. Instead, Tentacruel is now used as a Rapid Spin user. Tentacruel is very effective at using Rapid Spin thanks to its typing. Tentacruel safely switches into Cloyster and Fortress, the two premier spikers in OU, and spins away their spikes. They can Toxic Tentacruel and their attacks deal little damage to it. Yes, it can be spin blocked, but Gengar and Misdreavus take decent damage from Surf and can be pursued. Tentacruel is a specific Pokemon that's tough to fit, but it's good at what it does. Tentacruel has even seen usage in Ubers for its strength as a spinner, and it's helped in that tier by the lower prominence of Gengar. Golem is a premier Pokemon in GSC OU because of all the utility it provides. Golem fulfills the role of a normal resistant phaser that GSC teams need. Golem is a good user of Rapid Spin because Ghost types can spin block it safely. Gengar gets thrashed by Earthquake, while Misdreavus takes a heavy chunk. Rapid Spin is excellent utility for offensive and defensive teams alike because it helps them play around offensive threats. Pokemon like Zapdos and Nidoking become much easier to play around when spikes are off the field. Explosion off of Golem's high attack stat OHKOs nearly everything that doesn't resist it. Golem's utility lets it find itself on all sorts of teams in OU. With all this utility, it might be surprising to learn that Golem was rarely used for a lot of GSC's history. It languished as an obscure BL Pokemon who people saw as just a lesser rock type when compared to something like Rhydon or Tyranitar. Once Golem was discovered though, it rose to stardom. In July 2019, Golem's rise was cemented when it officially rose from UUBL to OU. Golem also gets used quite a bit in Ubers, carrying most of its good traits up there while checking Pokemon such as Cursed Tyranitar and Cursed Lugia. Rapidash is a solid Pokemon down in NU. With a blazing 105 speed, Rapidash is one of the fastest Pokemon in GSC NU. It notably outspeeds Primeape, Xatu, Fearow and Ninetales. Rapidash's speed and typing makes it an excellent choice for fast-paced offensive teams. Its Stab Fire Blast hits prominent Pokemon like Weezing, Statler, Xatu and Pineco hard. It also has double edge off a high attack stat for fire-resistant Pokemon, such as Octillery, Flareon and Ninetales. Rapidash's typing and serviceable bulk let it check threats like Xatu, Weezing, Ninetales, Magmar and Primeape. The ability to check these threats, as well as serve as a fast offensive Pokemon, make it so appealing for offensive teams. Rapidash isn't more common because of its poor matchup against Pokemon like Octillery, and competition with Ninetales and Flareon. Slowbro is one of the best Pokemon in GSC UU. UU Slowbro functions as an excellent tank, being both strong offensively and defensively. Slowbro's high physical bulk let it check or at least ward off various annoying Pokemon, including Piloswine, Quillfish, Dodrio, Quagsire, Granbull, Gligar, Scyther and Pinsir. Slowbro also doubles as a powerful special attacker. It has a high special attack stat and 2 high base power stab moves in Surf and Psychic. Psychic hits Nidoqueen and Haunter super effectively, while Surf hits ground types. Slowbro is an excellent user of Rest plus Sleep Talk, having 2 strong stabs for Sleep Talk to pull while asleep. Slowbro's ability to check so many Pokemon make it a very splashable Pokemon in GSC UU. It's not perfect, with its poor speed and electric weakness being annoying flaws, but Slowbro is one of the best Pokemon down in UU. Magneton is, despite a few issues, great down in UU. Magneton is the only fully evolved Steel type in UU, and this gives it an incredible amount of natural resistances. It notably resists all of Normal, Psychic, and Electric. This is a very useful set of types to resist. Magneton is notable for its ability to check Pokemon like Mr. Mime, Dodrio, Haunter, and non-Hidden Power Ground Granbull all in one slot. Magneton also doubles as a powerful special attacker. Its special attack stat is tied for the highest in the tier. Its stab electric type attacks hit the numerous water and flying types super effectively. Few Pokemon are capable of switching into Magneton. Magneton's roll compression makes it an attractive option for many bulkier and offensive teams. It's able to handle some of the more annoying Pokemon in UU, like Thunder Granbull and Curse Hypno. Magneton is mainly bogged down by its 4x ground weakness, which Nidoqueen and various hidden power ground using sweepers love to abuse. Its low HP and special defense mean it can lose to some Pokemon it's meant to check with spikes up. Farfetch'd is a Baton Pass user in NU. Farfetch'd certainly has the move pool to abuse Baton Pass, with it learning both Sword Stance and Agility. Farfetch'd can set up with either move and then pass them off to something that can abuse them. For example, a Rest Talk Statner lets pass the Sword Stance is a serious threat. Cubone is a popular Agility recipient because, with the attack doubling Thick Club, it outgoes nearly everything in NU after a Sword Stance. Farfetch'd isn't seen much in NU though. Its Baton Pass shtick isn't very consistent, and it relies a lot on surprise factor. It's difficult to get Baton Pass working with all the opposing set of Pokemon and explosions in NU. Farfetch'd is also a garbage Pokemon with no stat higher than 65. Dodrio is a dangerous Pokemon down in UU. With a high attack stat, stab double edge, and base 100 speed, Dodrio is a fast and immediately threatening Pokemon. Its double edge is difficult to switch into, especially with spikes up. UU doesn't have many good normal resists, and the most commonly used one in Haunter gets 2-hit KO'd by Drill Peck. Drill Peck also 2-hit KOs Scyther, Pinsir, and Blossom. Dodrio is one of the best punishers to Psychic plus Seismic Toss Hypno, switching into it and forcing it out with its strength. Dodrio brings more utility than you might expect. It's a decent answer to Pokemon like Pinsir and Gligar. Dodrio struggles to break Pokemon like Slowbro, Aerodactyl, Magneton, and Nidoqueen consistently. It's also difficult to fit onto teams because of its limited defensive utility, and it faces competition as an offensive flying type with Scyther. Dugong is among the elite Pokemon in GSC NU. Alongside Octillery, Dugong is one of the 2 premier bulky water types in NU. Dugong's typing and bulk lets check a variety of Pokemon, such as Xatu, Dugtrio, Fearow, Flareon, and Rapidash. Its stab Ice Beam is very spammable and comes with a nasty 10% chance to freeze. It also has stab Surf for Fire, Rock, and Ground types. Dugong can run a few different sets beyond its standard Rest Talk. Encore can be used to shut down setup from Curse Normals, as well as Pokemon like Kingler. Dugong can also use a 3 attacks plus protect set, which, while useless on its own, becomes very threatening when past the growth from Flareon. When compared to Octillery, Dugong is faster, bulkier, and has stab on its Ice Beam. It's ultimately the lesser of the 2 waters though. Octillery is more viable overall and preferred on many teams. Octillery is much stronger and lacks Dugong's weaknesses to fighting and rock, giving it the edge in several matchups. Muck used to be one of the many Pokemon in UUBL. Muck was once used on occasion in OU primarily because of Explosion. Muck was a toxic immune, specially bulky explosion user with a high attack stat, so some Explosion offenses liked using it. Muck has become a very rare sight though. Metagame developments in OU haven't been kind to it. Instead, Muck went on and dropped from UUBL to UU. Before 2023, Muk was generally considered to be one of the BLs who could fit into UU and be fine. In 2023, people seriously began trying to get Muk into UU. It would provide the tier with another wall breaker. After being tested in several tours, Muk, alongside Aerodactyl, dropped to UU in February 2024. Muk in UU has mostly been underwhelming. It's not awful, but it's a hard mon to get working. UU is hostile to a mono poison type like Muk, given all the psychics and grounds in the tier. Muk has to kill itself to break all the grounds in UU. The fact that your boom is also so telegraphed sucks when Haunter is so common and willing to eat your explosion. You are often better off using something like Scyther or Pinsir over Muk. It's also worth noting that Muk rarely gets used in Ubers on extremely offensive teams due to explosion and its high special bulk. Cloyster is one of the kings of competitive GSC. Cloyster is widely considered to be the third best Pokemon in OU and a top 5 Pokemon in Ubers. Cloyster is so good because it is the best user of arguably the best move in the game, that being Spikes. Spikes are a move of incredible importance in OU. The chip provided by Spikes is highly valuable for a wide variety of Pokemon. I can't go into too much detail on how valuable Spikes are here, but just know that they are a very, very big deal. The OU metagame in many ways revolves around Spikes, and getting the advantage in the Spikes game is key in winning games. With some rare exceptions, a Spiker will be used on every team in GSC OU. Cloyster is the most commonly used Spiker. Cloyster's sky-high physical defense lets it switch into Pokemon like Snorlax and Steelix, and its typing lets it check threats like Steelix and Golem. Cloyster also gets Explosion, and it's fantastic at using the move. Cloyster has Stab Surf to discourage the explosion-resistant Pokemon. Rock types are hit super effectively, while the OU Steel types are frail on the special side. Cloyster can even use Rapid Spin, though it is illegal with Explosion, so it isn't seen as much. The 3-mon core of Snorlax, Zapdos, and Cloyster has been named the defining core of GSC OU, just to show how elite Cloyster is. Cloyster is also one of the elite Pokemon in Ubers. Spikes are similarly useful in Ubers, and Cloyster is generally the easiest Spiker to fit. Gengar is a dominant and influential Pokemon in GSC OU. Some players consider Gengar to be the 4th best Pokemon in OU. Gengar is one of only 2 ghost types in GSC, and this gives it many perks. Its immunity to normal lets it block Rapid Spin, take 0 damage from Explosion, and wall mono-normal attackers like certain Snorlax sets. Its poison typing also gives it a toxic immunity. Gengar is also a fierce offensive threat. Its special attack stat is high and it has a vast coverage move pool, notably possessing Bulk Beam coverage with Ice Punch and Thunderbolt or Thunder. Gengar is also one of the fastest Pokemon in GSC. Its access to moves like Explosion and Destiny Bond make it a great assassin, being effective at luring in Pokemon like Raikou and removing them with Explosion. Gengar is a diverse and unpredictable threat. It can run Dynamic Punch, Hypnosis, Thief, Fire Punch, Power Strong and Mean Look, and even Psychic. Thanks to its coverage, explosion, and unpredictability, Gengar is a very difficult Pokemon to answer consistently. It's one of the most obnoxious, dangerous, and consistent Pokemon in GSC OU. Gengar is also good in Ubers, though it's much less common and dominant than in OU. This is primarily due to its iffy matchup against some of the Ubers. Its sets can look a bit different than the ones in OU, with moves like Toxic that you wouldn't consider in OU getting used in Ubers. Hypno is one of the best Pokemon in GSC UU. Hypno beats, or at least checks, several of the most dangerous Pokemon. This includes Mr. Mime, Haunter, Electabuzz, Nidoqueen, Gyarados, Lantern, and more. The fact that Hypno does this enables many teams, mainly offensive teams, to work it all. Hypno is difficult to bring down for many Pokemon. Hypno always uses Rest plus Sleep Talk sets, but there are 2 versions of this Rest Talk set. The first uses Psychic plus Seismic Toss. Seismic Toss gives Hypno consistent damage. It's great at generating momentum and forcing rests. On the other hand, Hypno can attempt to sweep with a Curse set, abusing its high special bulk and lack of common weaknesses. Pokemon like Blastoise and opposing Hypno, who wall and stall out the Seismic Toss set, get set up on and eventually overpowered. Hypno struggles against Pokemon like Scyther, Pinsir, Piloswine and Granbull, but its positives more than make up for it. It's a pillar of GSC UU. Kingler is one of the most dangerous Pokemon in GSC NU. After a Sword Stance, Kingler 2-hit KOs nearly everything in NU at worst. Its solid physical bulk, as well as water and ice resistances, let it tank hits from Pokemon like Fearow, Dugtrio and Dugong. Kingler is one of the best stall breakers in NU. It excels most against slower teams in general. Against faster paced teams though, Kingler struggles. These teams employ Pokemon like Xatu, Primeape and Persian, who outspeed and two-shot Kingler with their electric coverage moves. While Weezing and Octillery are slower, they also 2-hit KO Kingler. Kingler struggles to break Curse normal types if it doesn't set up before they come in. Kingler's awkward speed also means several common offensive Pokemon outspeed it. Electrode is a decent Pokemon in GSC UU. At base 140 speed, Electrode is the fastest Pokemon in the entire game. Outspeeding everything is, of course, very nice. Of particular note is Electrode's ability to outspeed and 2-hit KO Scyther. Explosion lets Electrode trade itself for mass damage on traditional electric checks, like Nidoqueen and Piloswine. Electrode is very effective at using Light Screen and Reflect. Its speed lets it set up the right screen for the situation, and has Explosion, which ends the turn and brings something else in to abuse the screens. These traits make Electrode the most important Pokemon for hyper-offensive teams. On more traditional teams, Electrode is certainly usable, but it faces more competition with Electabuzz on these teams. Electrode and Electabuzz share many issues, notably their average bulk and ground weakness. Electrode also has to kill itself to break checks like Nidoqueen and Piloswine. Exeggutor is a force to be reckoned with in GSC UU. Exeggutor is one of the best Pokemon at dismantling teams. Its stab psychic hits very hard and smacks Pokemon like Gengar, Nidoking and Machamp. Exeggutor's grass typing gives it both Stab Giga Drain for ground and rock types, and Sleep Powder and Stun Spore to spread status. Exeggutor can use these status moves to set up Pokemon like Machamp, Marowak, Vaporeon and Charizard. Exeggutor can also run Hidden Power Fire, which hits the tier Steel types. Exeggutor's typing and serviceable bulk let it check Pokemon like Vaporeon, Machamp and Marowak. Exeggutor ties all this together with Explosion, which threatens to OHKO most of the non-normal resistant Pokemon. Exeggutor is a difficult Pokemon to dance around. It hits you hard with Psychic, it threatens status, and it forces trades with Explosion. For a long time, Exeggutor was considered the 4th best Pokemon in OU. It's fallen a bit since then, due to metagame development such as the rise of Jinx, but it's still one of the most dangerous OU Pokemon. With Thick Club in hand, Marowak's attack stat jumps from a meager 254 to an enormous 508, by far the highest in the game. Marowak is so strong that it must lower its attack DV to avoid overflowing the 999 cap after a Sword Stance. After using Sword Stance, Marowak can 1-hit KO nearly everything. Even without Sword Stance, Marowak hits very hard. Its Stab Earthquake also thrashes rock types, poison types and Raikou. Marowak's insane strength makes it an appealing option for many team styles. Offensive teams can pair Marowak with paralysis support to circumvent its low speed. Stall teams can use Marowak as a win condition, also supporting it with status and rapid spin. Baton Pass teams love using Marowak. If Marowak sets up a Sword Stance after being passed in agility by something like Scizor, Smeargle or Jolteon, it can wipe out entire teams. Marowak's destruction is limited by a few factors. Its special defense is poor, and it's weak to water, ice and grass. It's also very slow and can't hold leftovers. The inability to hold leftovers stops Marowak from passively healing, making spikes a real nuisance for it. Hitmonlee is a solid, if unspectacular Pokemon in GSC NU. Hitmonlee's weirdly high special defense stat lets it switch into Pokemon like Octillery, Chinchou, Dugong, Ninetales and Magnemite. It then forces these Pokemon out with its strong high jump kick. This high jump kick also hits the many normal types for super effective damage. Hitmonlee also has Body Slam to try paralyze any Xatu's, Weezings, and Pinecos that try switching into it. Rest plus Sleep Talk is its most common set, but it can also use Substitute plus Reversal. This set is hard to use, primarily due to the prominence of Weezing, as well as faster Pokemon like Xatu and Fearow. Under the right circumstances though, it can be incredibly deadly. Hitmonchan is one of only 2 Pokemon in PUBL. Dropping to PU after the tier's 2020 revival, Hitmonchan was a great but balanced Pokemon early on. Eventually though, people realised that high jump kick plus body slam, a move combination that was previously considered illegal, was actually fully legal. When this was fixed, Hitmonchan unlocked its true potential. The body slam set was incredibly obnoxious and warped the tier around it. It checked all sorts of Pokemon and was difficult to truly punish. Hitmonchan would go on to get banned from PU. Nowadays in NU, Hitmonchan is pretty bad, with Hitmonlee and Hitmontop outclassing it in almost every aspect. It does have one small advantage over Hitmontop on stall teams though. It outspeeds Delibird, who is sometimes used as a spiker in NU and spins away its spikes with Rapid Spin. Hitmontop is worse against Delibird because it is slower. Lickitung is an average Pokemon in GSC NU. As a lead, it can set up Sword Sense and then just attack the opposing team until it faints. Stab Return plus Coverage Earthquake is a very good attacking combo in this metagame. Lickitung's bulk is also decent, especially with Protect for additional leftovers recovery. Protect makes Lickitung more difficult to play around. Explosion and Self-Destruct would normally be an easy way to beat it, but with Protect, it forces mind games. Lickitung can also run the same set just in the back. This way it can finish off teams as opposed to breaking holes. Lickitung struggles with several Pokemon though. Persian outspeeds and sleeps it, Pineco sets up spikes, Hitmonlee and Primeape outspeed and 2-hit KO, and Wigglytuff generally wins the setup war with Curse. It faces competition with other lead attackers like Persian. Lickitung is generally outclassed by other normal types like Wigglytuff and Porygon, outside of its lead attacking niche. Weezing is the best Pokemon in GSC NU. Weezing is versatile and offers an incredible mix of offense and defense. Offensively, it has a strong Sludge Bomb with a 30% poison rate. It also has Thunder for flying and water types. Weezing's powerful explosion makes it great at dismantling teams, removing problematic threats, and forcing trades. Only a few Pokemon can safely switch into Weezing, and they either risk dying to Explosion, being poisoned by Sludge Bomb, or falling to a coverage move. Weezing can run Hidden Power Water for rock and ground types, Fire Blast for Magnemite and Pineco, or Haze to remove status boosts. It can also run a Rest Talk set to give itself more longevity. It can run either Thunder Rest Talk to retain the hit on water and flying types, or Curse to act as a bulky sweeper. Weezing's high physical bulk and fighting resistance make it the best Primeape check in the tier, and allow it to check Pokemon like Fearow and Hitmonlee. Weezing is very useful and consistent in just about every matchup. There are few truly bad matchups for Weezing. It provides an insane amount of utility to its team and it can be hard not to use when building. Rhydon is a decent threat in GSC OU. Its very high attack stat and unresisted stab combination make it a physical powerhouse. Rhydon can be a major threat when supported right. Paralysis is commonly paired with Rhydon due to its slow speed. With Roar, Rhydon is able to provide the role of a normal resistant phaser that every GSC OU team needs. Roar can be used to rack up spikes damage and combat opposing curse users, such as Skarmory. Rhydon is ultimately quite hard to use however. Of the common normal resistant phasers, it's generally the worst against Snorlax. It competes heavily with Golem as a rock ground type. Golem has far more utility thanks to Rapid Spin as well as the incredible explosion. It also competes with Tyranitar and Steelix. Rhydon has poor special defense and 4 times weaknesses to water and grass, as well as an ice weakness. Its low speed is also an issue. These days, Rhydon is one of the least seen and viable of the OU Pokemon. It's the second lowest ranked OU Pokemon on the viability rankings. Tangela is a below average Pokemon in GSC NU. It has a few nice qualities. It checks Pokemon like Dugtrio, Statler, Pupitar and Kingler thanks to its high physical bulk and typing, and it has instant recovery with Synthesis. Fire types, Xatu, Weezing, Fearow and more are all major issues however. It also has a bad case of 4 move slot syndrome, only 8 Synthesis PP to work with, and a big weakness to status since it doesn't use rest. Tangela dropped to PU in 2020 as a result of it being below average in NU. Tangela isn't bad in PU, but it's pretty underwhelming. It's generally overshadowed by Sunflora. While Sunflora is much less physically bulky, it has the advantage on the special side. Unfortunately for Tangela, a specially bulky grass type is more valuable in PU than a physically bulky one, due to the prominence of Pokemon like Elekid and Seadra. Tangela does match up better against Pokemon like Hitmontop and Seaking, but Sunflora's better matchups are generally more useful. Kangaskhan is a viable but deeply flawed Pokemon in GSC OU. Kangaskhan primarily acts as a curse normal that can phase with Roar. Roar allows Kangaskhan to rack up spikes damage and beat opposing curse users. After a curse, Kangaskhan outslows most Roar and Whirlwind users, meaning its Roar will be the successful one. Traditional answers to curse Snorlax, such as Roar Golem and Tyranitar, as well as Skarmory, don't work as well versus Kangaskhan. That's all well and good, but Kangaskhan still kinda sucks. It relies heavily on spikes, so Rapid Spin is very annoying for it. It can hurt ghost types outside of spikes damage. Running Kangaskhan stacks more weaknesses to Pokemon like Machamp. Pokemon like Steelix also just completely dominate it. In NU, Seaking is mostly outclassed by Kingler. Yeah, Seaking has agility and better special defense, but the drop in power is so substantial that it's just not worth it. NU Seaking only works if it's paired alongside Kingler, and stacking them is hard due to the defensive issues it produces. Seaking dropped to PU as a result of its low viability. In PU, Seaking is a massive threat. It's a highly threatening sweeper with Sword Stance, abusing the lower bulk of PU to 2-hit KO most of the tier after a boost. Seaking isn't easily KO'd either, as its bulk is decent and it resists water, fire and ice. Seaking can even run a rest plus sleep talk set to capitalize on its bulk, keeping Sword Stance to remain a sweeper. It's also very versatile. Substitute Sword Stance, Mint Berry Rest, Hidden Power Bug, Surf, Agility plus Sword Stance, there's a lot it can do. Seaking is one of the most threatening Pokemon in PU, and some would argue it's one of the best Pokemon overall. Starmie is an elite Pokemon in GSC OU. Starmie is most commonly used as a rapid spin user. Starmie is an effective spinner due to its high speed and access to recover. Starmie is annoying for the two main spikers, Cloyster and Fortress, to deal with, especially when it decides to use Substitute. Recover gives Starmie more longevity than most spinners, making it harder to wear down and making it better at checking what it needs to. Starmie's typing and recover make it an adequate check to Pokemon like Machamp, Steelix, Cursed Tyranitar, Rhydon and Charizard. Starmie can use Psychic to improve its matchup against Machamp and Gengar, or Thunderwave to support Pokemon like Marowak, Rhydon or Belly Drum Snorlax. Starmie is most often seen on defensive teams, but it can also go in a more offensive direction. With Nightmare plus Substitute, Starmie can abuse the prominence of Rest plus Sleep Talk. Starmie can beat Pokemon like Rest Talk, Snorlax, Zapdos and Raikou if used effectively. Mr. Mime was actually in GSC NU before the 2018 revamp of NU. Mr. Mime was the best Pokemon when it was in NU. It was very tough to deal with due to its high special attack stat and dearth of Dark, Steel and opposing Psychic types. Mr. Mime 3-hit KO'd most of the Pokemon in NU and it had decent speed. Its high special defense let it run an effective Rest plus Sleep Talk set. It could also dip into its wide utility and supporting move pool. Mr. Mime's best check was opposing Mr. Mime. Eventually though, people realised that Mr. Mime was actually quite good in UU, so it rose up there. Mr. Mime is solid in current day UU. It's able to threaten many Pokemon thanks to its high special attack and move pool. It has Thunder to hit the numerous water and flying types in GSC UU. Mr. Mime is one of the most versatile Pokemon in UU. It can run a Nightmare set, it can run a Thief set, it can run a Rest Talk set, and it can even use a Baton Pass set. It is, however, tricky to fit onto teams because of its bulk, and it struggles to break Pokemon like Hypno and Ampharos. Scyther is a polarizing force in GSC UU. Scyther is the most dangerous sweeper in UU. With base 105 speed, it's among the fastest Pokemon, and after a Sword Stance, it 2-hit KOs most of the tier. Scyther also has serviceable bulk, letting it take hits from Pokemon like Hypno and Blastoise if needed. Scyther used to be known for its Sword Stance plus Baton Pass strategies, but this has declined in favour of Double Edge, which lets Scyther 2-hit KO Pokemon like Gyarados after a boost. Scyther is one of the most influential Pokemon in UU. It requires immense respect both in the builder and battle, and giving it free turns is a very easy way to lose games. For a time, people seriously wanted to ban Scyther, and in fact, it was the main reason Aerodactyl ended up dropping to UU. Aerodactyl has made Scyther easier to deal with, and it's not like it was perfect without it. The main problem with Scyther is that it's hard to fit on teams, because it doesn't provide much defensive utility. If you can fit Scyther though, it's an absolute menace. Jynx is an influential and dangerous Pokemon in GSC UU. Jynx has many things going for it as a special attacker. Its special attack and speed are solid, and its stab combination is excellent. Psychic hits common offensive Pokemon like Nidoking, Gengar and Machamp, while Ice Beam threatens Zapdos, Exeggutor, Golem and Marowak. Jynx's Ice Beam can be repeatedly used to fish for freeze, which is devastating if it freezes one of its checks. Jynx also doubles as a sleeper with Lovely Kiss, threatening to shut down a response to it. Jynx is particularly effective as a sleeper because it 2-hit KOs the most common sleep absorber, that being Rest Talk Zapdos. Jynx is a big deal in modern GSC, but it wasn't always like this. Jynx was a rarely used BL Pokemon for much of GSC's history. In the mid to late 2010s though, Jynx emerged as a way to destroy the common explosion offenses that were all the rage. It began seeing much more usage after this, and eventually, it was promoted to OU status in 2019. Jynx continues to influence GSC. It's a major reason why Rest plus Sleep Talk Snorlax has become so common on offensive teams. Electabuzz is an above average Pokemon in GSC UU. Electabuzz is one of the fastest Pokemon in UU. It notably speed ties with Scyther. Stab electric type attacks are valuable in UU given all the water and flying types running around. Electabuzz learns Psychic, which 3-hit KOs the tier's main ground type, Nidoqueen. It also has Fire Punch for Piloswine, Magneton and Blossom, Cross Chop for Piloswine and Magneton, as well as a hard hit on Chansey, and Ice Punch for Gligar. Electabuzz is also effective at using Thief. Electabuzz is the sole viable user of Pursuit in UU. With Pursuit, it can trap and remove Pokemon like Haunter. Removing Haunter makes life easier for Monocurse, Granbull and Hypno, and lets Blastoise spin easier. Like the previously mentioned Mr. Mime and Scyther, Electabuzz can be difficult to slot on teams because of its average bulk. Its offensive set has several annoying hurdles to overcome, like Ampharos, Hypno, Nidoqueen and Quagsire. Magmar is an average Pokemon in GSC NU. It's got a lot of potential, but it's difficult to make the most out of it. Magmar has one of the highest special attack stats in NU. Its Fire Blast hits hard, and it torches Pokemon like Pineco. It also has some nice coverage moves. Thunder Punch 3-hit KOs Octillery, while Cross Chop hits rock types and threatens to break normal types with a critical hit. Magmar is an effective user of Sunny Day, which powers up its Fire Blast and weakens incoming water attacks from Pokemon like Octillery and Dugong. Magmar is also quite fast, notably outspeeding Pokemon like Statler and Hitmonlee. However, Magmar struggles to get onto the field. Its bulk, especially on the physical side, isn't anything great, and its typing doesn't give it many useful resistances. It's also inconsistent at breaking Octillery, even with Thunder Punch, and struggles immensely with Ninetales and Rapidash. Pokemon like Flareon and Rapidash accomplish much of what Magmar can do, while bringing more utility to the table. Pinsir is a big threat down in GSC UU. With Sword Stance and a gargantuan attack stat, Pinsir is one of UU's best sweepers. Most of UU is 2-hit KO'd by Pinsir after a Sword Stance. Pinsir is also decently fast for UU standards, outspeeding Pokemon such as Nidoqueen, Gyarados and Feraligatr. Pinsir is very good at breaking holes in teams, opening them up for its teammates to finish the job. Compared to Scyther, it is not weak to Ice or Electric, and is only 2 times weak to Rock as opposed to 4 times. This makes it much better at setting up against Piloswine, Ice Beam Nidoqueen, Quagsire and Gligar. Pinsir is a bit tricky to fit on teams, but it is a bit better compared to Scyther because of its fewer weaknesses. Its lower speed is a major disadvantage compared to Scyther. Pokemon like Mr. Mime, Haunter and Dodrio outspeed Pinsir unlike Scyther. Pinsir can also be shut down by Pokemon like Aerodactyl and Jumpluff. Tauros is, unfortunately, a non-entity in competitive GSC. It's in BL and can't drop to UU because it would be too strong, but it's also awful in OU. It might seem appealing as a fast offensive normal, with Earthquake and Fire Blast for standard normal checks, but it's extremely difficult to actually use it. It has almost no good entry points, is crippled by status, and requires a heavy amount of prediction. Even with perfect play though, Tauros often comes up short power wise. It is both checked and outclassed by Snorlax. Gyarados is a fantastic Pokemon in GSC UU. Gyarados is one of UU's best mixed attackers due to its high attack and move pool. Hydro Pump hits ground types, Thunder hits water and flying types, and Hidden Power Flying hits grass and bug types. Double Edge rounds Gyarados is set off as a solid hit on Pokemon like Lantern, Ampharos and Hypno. Gyarados doesn't have many reliable answers, and the Pokemon that do answer it can be broken with good play and prediction. Defensively, Gyarados has high special defense and a ground immunity that notably makes it Spikes immune. It's the best answer to Piloswine, and it's a decent answer to Pokemon like Slowbro and Gligar. Gyarados' ability to survive a hit from Scyther and Pinsir and then 2-hit KO them in return is highly useful. Its 4 times electric weakness is very troubling however, as electric type attacks are very common in GSC UU. Lapras is, like Tauros, a non-entity for the most part. It's in BL and generally considered too strong for UU, while going unused in OU. Lapras is almost entirely outclassed by other water types, like Suicune, Vaporeon, Starmie, and even Kingdra. Its additional ice typing mostly harms it, as this adds on weaknesses to fighting and rock. It has the same flaws as the aforementioned water types too, such as giving free turns to Pokemon like Snorlax and Raikou. Lapras has, however, seen a tiny bit of usage recently with a Perish Song plus Whirlpool set. This set is very unreliable, given the accuracy and randomized nature of Whirlpool, but hey, it can pick up a few kills if you get lucky. Ditto is without a doubt one of the worst Pokemon in the game. Its entire gimmick of transforming into an opposing Pokemon has way too many issues. Ditto copies every one of the opponent's stats but HP, meaning when you transform, you keep Ditto's measly 48 HP stat. Ditto was also naturally slow and frail. You often need to take a big hit just to get the transform off. You also choose what Ditto transforms into. When you transform into something, you are stuck with just 5 PP and all the moves. Ditto has a garbage gimmick that isn't viable in any GSC tier, not even in GSC ZU. Vaporeon is a major threat in GSC OU. With growth, Vaporeon can act as a bulky sweeper, abusing its typing and good bulk. Vaporeon's Surf immediately threatens the tier's ground and rock types. Its bulk makes it a natural check to Pokemon like Tyranitar, Steelix and Moltres. With growth, Vaporeon can break through nearly everything. Even Blissey loses to it unless it uses a tech like Present. Vaporeon is a major threat to many stall teams. A lot of Pokemon on these teams deal minimal damage to it, while it sets up and eventually runs them down. Vaporeon most commonly uses a mono attacking set with Rest Talk and Growth. Vaporeon can also drop Sleep Talk in favour of Acid Armor, which improves its matchup against Snorlax and lets it better survive explosions. Vaporeon is also capable of passing its growth to teammates with Baton Pass. Vaporeon is a star member of one of the most famous GSC teams, that being Borat's Explosion Offense. This team has seen a lot of tournament usage and success, and remains viable to this day despite being over 20 years old. Jolteon is also a dangerous Pokemon in GSC OU. At base 130 speed, Jolteon is the fastest viable Pokemon in GSC OU. Jolteon's speed and high special attack stat make it an effective growth sweeper. It becomes a massive threat to many offensive teams if you can remove or weaken Snorlax. Stab Thunder or Thunderbolt, and boosted Hidden Power Water or Hidden Power Ice threatens much of the OU cast. Jolteon is also capable of passing its special attack boost to Pokemon like Zapdos with Baton Pass. Jolteon is one of the most effective late game cleaners in GSC. Jolteon has even used Rest on defensive teams. With Growth and Rest, Jolteon can check Pokemon like Zapdos while acting as a win condition with Growth. Jolteon is also effective as an Agility Pass user since it threatens most of the tier's phasers. Jolteon is notable for the decline and resurgence it had. For most of the game's history, Jolteon was an OU, but it dropped to BL in 2019 due to a decline in usage. Jolteon then started seeing more usage again, and it rose back up to OU in July 2024. Jolteon is also notable for being far more common and viable in Ubers than in OU. Jolteon is helped in Ubers by various changes, such as the far lower usage of Rest Talk Snorlax. Ubers also has Mewtwo, a very appealing Pokemon to pass growth to. Growth passing to Mewtwo is one of the most powerful strategies in GSC Ubers. While Flareon is by far the worst evolution, it's at least good down in NU. With a Rest plus Sleep Talk set, Flareon is able to check Pokemon like Ninetales, Xatu, Magnemite and Weezing. This set is also far from passive. Fire Blast and Double Edge hurt coming from Flareon. Its Double Edge is notably strong enough to 3-hit KO Octillery, making Flareon better against it than the other Rest Talk fire types. Flareon can also use an effective Growth plus Baton Pass set. With this set, it can pass special attack boosts to Pokemon like Dugong and Xatu, making them more difficult to handle. This set is, especially if given 3 turns, possibly lethal. Physical bulk and speed are the main issues for Flareon. Flareon is outsped by many Pokemon in NU, and its bulk means it gets chunked by normal types, Primeape, ground and rock types, and so on. Amistar is a significantly below average Pokemon in GSC UU. Amistar's rock-water typing is very awkward for the UU metagame. It makes Amistar weak to both electric and ground, and means it's a water type that can check ground types. Amistar has a beefy special attack stat, but because of its typing and middling special defense, it can't use it much. Plus, it still gets handled by Pokemon like Hypno, Lantern and Blastoise. Amistar is basically never a team's choice for a Grand Bull check. Haunter and Slowbro are far better on offense, Magneton is better for slower offenses and slower teams in general, and Shuckle is better for hard stall teams. Even Graveler is better than Amistar. Kabutops is about as bad as Amistar is in UU. Water Rock is a bad typing for the UU metagame. Kabutops does have a high attack stat and sword stance, but why use this over Scyther or Pinsir? Kabutops' best non-hidden power rock stab move is Ancient Power, which is just 60 base power and has only 8 PP. Kabutops is also frail specially and weak to both ground and electric. Kabutops gets easily revenge killed by the likes of Electabuzz and Haunter, and struggles to break Pokemon like Slowbro and Quagsire even after a boost. Like with Scyther and Pinsir, Kabutops is hard to fit due to its limited defensive utility, but the bug types are overall way better sweepers than it. Kabutops can undeniably be scary if it gets an Ancient Power Omni boost, but it's left fishing for that to be a true threat. Aerodactyl used to be a useless BL Pokemon. In OU, while Aerodactyl does appear to check the incredibly dominant Earthquake Snorlax, it's a worse Skarmory. Aerodactyl's bulk means it wasn't even that good versus Snorlax, and Skarmory offers much more beyond beating EQ Lax. Aerodactyl is too weak and frail to do anything in OU. That's okay though, because Aerodactyl dropped from UUBL to UU. Aerodactyl has had a decent impact on GSC UU since dropping. Its biggest pro is its ability to hard counter the terrifying Scyther. Aerodactyl also checks Pokemon like Dodrio and Pinsir. Aerodactyl is tied as the second fastest Pokemon in UU, and it threatens a lot of the tier. Aerodactyl's Earthquake is very useful for all the electric and poison types. The addition of Aerodactyl has helped lower the viability and usage of Scyther, leading to a slower paced GSC UU. Snorlax is the most powerful Pokemon in competitive GSC. It's pretty common knowledge that Snorlax is the best Pokemon in GSC OU, and it's considered mandatory on serious teams. It's also frequently cited as the best Pokemon in Ubers, though the top spot is far more contested with Mewtwo. Snorlax is an incredible Pokemon on both the offensive and defensive side, and it can run several different sets. Snorlax's sole weakness is fighting, and the only viable fighting type who actually runs fighting moves is Machamp, who can switch in safely. Snorlax is incredibly bulky on the special side, and after a curse, it's very physically bulky too. Offensively, Snorlax has stab normal attacks and Earthquake, a combination that, with Curse, is almost impossible to answer. Cursed Earthquake Snorlax threatens to run offensive teams over and forces stall teams to use Skarmory. With Rest plus Sleep Talk, Snorlax is a powerful status absorbing tank that checks a variety of Pokemon. Rest plus Sleep Talk has become the most common Snorlax set in OU. It's incredibly valuable for its ability to switch into Pokemon like Zapdos, Raikou, Nidoking and Jinx and actually threaten them in return. Snorlax can also drop Rest and run a 4 attack set with Self-Destruct, a Belly Drum set and even a Toxic set. Snorlax shapes every corner of the GSC OU metagame. Skarmory is an elite Pokemon largely because it beats Earthquake Snorlax. Teams need a normal resistant phaser to beat Curse Snorlax. Stall teams need to run specific combinations of Pokemon to account for Snorlax's various sets. Basic special attackers are far less viable because they struggle with Snorlax. So many Pokemon have to tweak their movesets just to be best off against Snorlax. Miltank uses Growl to reduce Snorlax's attack. GSC OU Snorlax is so good that not using it actively hampers you. It's not invincible of course, it can't fit all the coverage moves it wants, and its low speed can be an issue. It is frequently targeted by moves like Explosion and Thief. As mentioned, Snorlax is also frequently cited as the best Pokemon in Ubers. Its sets differ quite a bit from OU. Rest Talk is far less common, and Rest Talk without Curse isn't really viable. Uber Snorlax most commonly uses Lovely Kiss, which gives it the best odds at breaking new Pokemon like Barrier Mewtwo and Lugia. Snorlax needs Curse in Ubers. Without Curse, it just gets stalled out by all the new Recover Pokemon. Snorlax carries most of what made it so powerful in OU to Ubers, and it can check new Pokemon like Mewtwo. Like in OU, Uber Snorlax is generally considered too good not to use. Articuno is probably the worst legendary Pokemon in the game. Articuno is an incredibly rare sight in GSC OU, only seeing use on very specific stall teams. Articuno faces heavy competition from Pokemon like Suicune, who check a lot of the same Pokemon as Articuno while being better overall. Zapdos is also largely better as a bulky flying type due to its far better typing. You really have to accommodate Articuno's weaknesses when building with it. Articuno is, at the very least, very effective as a sleep absorber. It matches up well against several of the common sleep users, like Nidoking, Jinx, and Exeggutor. Articuno is also effective at fishing for Ice Beam freezes due to its bulk. Speaking of freeze, Articuno itself is freeze immune. Snorlax is the king of GSC OU, but Zapdos is very clearly the second in command. Zapdos is an incredibly lethal special attacker. Its Stab Thunder is tied for the strongest unboosted special attack and comes with a nasty 30% paralysis rate. Counterplay to Zapdos is limited. Raikou and Rest Talk Snorlax are both common answers to it, but Raikou dislikes thunder paralysis, and Snorlax is slower and takes upwards of 30% from thunder. Other counters, like Blissey or Quagsire, are far more specific and hard to fit on teams. Zapdos is able to switch into and force out the majority of the Pokemon in GSC OU. The fact that Zapdos switches in so much often means it can repeatedly make progress. Zapdos' typing also makes it one of the few Pokemon that's immune to spikes. Zapdos can pair its Stab Thunder with either Hidden Power Ice, which hits Exeggutor and Ground types, or Hidden Power Water, which hits Rock/Ground types far harder and hits Steelix too. Zapdos is most commonly seen using a Rest Toxa, but it can also drop Rest and use Whirlwind as an offensive tool. With Whirlwind, Zapdos can abuse the fact that it forces out so much to be an effective offensive phaser. Zapdos defines GSCOU to an incredible degree and is one of the 3 most used Pokemon in tournaments. Zapdos is also very good in Ubers, carrying most of what made it so good in OU up there. It's helped in Ubers by its good matchup against new threats like Barrier Mewtwo. It's not the second best Pokemon, given how the top spots are more contested by Pokemon like Mewtwo and Mew, but it often ranks highly. Moltres is a viable but ultimately flawed Pokemon in GSCOU. Moltres is the most effective user of Sunny Day in OU. Once the sun is up, the damage Moltres can do is awe-inspiring. With Charcoal as its item and the sun up, Moltres can 2-hit KO Snorlax after spikes damage. That should be a good indicator of how powerful it can be. Sun also reduces Thunder's accuracy from 70% to 50%, making Zapdos and Raikou less effective answers. Moltres' bulk and typing also let you check Pokemon like Exeggutor, Steelix, Heracross and Nidoking. Moltres has a major issue though, it sucks at breaking through its counters. Fire-resistant Pokemon like Tyranitar, Starmie, Vaporeon, Suicune and Tentacruel all dominate it, as does Blissey. It's ultimately inconsistent at breaking Snorlax, Zapdos and Raikou. It needs the right circumstances to consistently get by them. The fact that it's using an 85% accurate move with only 8 PP doesn't help either. You can use Flamethrower and even use Leftovers over Charcoal, but the power drop is substantial. Despite its impressive stats and move pool, Dragonite is not a top threat in GSCOU. Dragonite lacks a good physical stab attack, severely limiting it offensively. It also has a troublesome 4x ice weakness and awkward speed. Dragonite is inconsistent at breaking through Pokemon like Snorlax, Raikou and Zapdos. Other mixed attackers, like Nidoking, are often preferred over Dragonite. Its good stats and move pool are enough to give it a decent niche though. Dragonite can function as a mixed attacker. It has the classic Thunder plus Ice Beam combination to hit a variety of threats super effectively. It also has a strong Dynamic Punch for Pokemon like Snorlax and Tyranitar. Dynamic Punch's confusion can be made more annoying with Thunder Wave, which functions as support for Pokemon like Machamp or Charizard. Dragonite can also, on hardcore stall teams, run a Rest Talk set with Haze and Reflect. While this set is incapable of dealing damage, it can shut down sweepers like Machamp, Vaporeon, and even Belly Drum Snorlax. Mewtwo is at the very top of GSC Ubers. Mewtwo's incredible stats and move pool make it a highly versatile and dangerous opponent. Mewtwo is tied as the fastest viable Pokemon with Jolteon. It also has the highest special attack stat in the game and a wide coverage move pool. Mewtwo's offensive set is an immediately lethal threat that often just needs one check removed to tear teams apart. Mewtwo is made more dangerous by self-destruct, which threatens to remove a check like Snorlax or Raikou. Mewtwo can also function as a defensive Pokemon. With Recover, Serviceable Physical Bulk, and Barrier, Mewtwo can check Pokemon like Mew and Snorlax. Barrier Mewtwo is a polarizing force that shapes GSC Ubers around it. Pokemon that struggle against Barrier Mewtwo struggle overall in GSC Ubers. It's very good at wearing teams down with Toxic and a special attack of your choice. Barrier Mewtwo is also a prime recipient of growth from Jolteon. Mewtwo can run moves like Psychic and Ice Beam on barrier sets if you have Jolteon, and if you pass growth to Mewtwo, it can be game over. Mewtwo's main weakness tends to be status. It becomes much easier to handle it if it's paralyzed. Mewtwo remains a beyond excellent Pokemon though. While several consider Snorlax to be the best Pokemon in GSC Ubers, others favour Mewtwo. Mewtwo isn't mandatory, but it can be hard not to use it. Mew is a huge threat in GSC UUBLs. Mew's balanced stats and incredible move pool make it a highly versatile threat. It is most often seen with sword stance. Mew can 2-hit KO or 3-hit KO most of the tier after setting up, and its good bulk makes it easier for it to find setup opportunities. Mew's most powerful move is Explosion. Unboosted Explosion is already very powerful, and after a sword stance, it deals massive damage to even normal resistant Pokemon. Mew is fantastic as an offensive lead. With Miracle Berry and Thunder Wave, it matches up well against other common leads like Snorlax and Mewtwo. It is very difficult to stop Mew from removing something with Explosion. Your best play typically is to accept playing 5 vs 5. Non-lead Mew often uses Earthquake plus Rock Slide, an unresisted attacking combination. It still usually runs Explosion, but Soft Boiled can be used for more longevity. With Soft Boiled, Mew becomes one of the best answers to offensive Mewtwo. Sword Stance is not required on Mew. It can run sets like 3 special attacks plus Explosion. It can also run a general utility set with Soft Boiled and status moves like Thunder Wave. Mew is one of the most important Pokemon in GSC UUBLs. My good friend Sophie insisted that I give her a shout out in this video, so here it is. Here's her shout out right at the very end.